Okay, is that clearer?
Yeah, that's better. So while Graham
Okay,
is
that's
getting
good.
set up, I'll give him a quick introduction.
Thanks, Hans.
Graham Armfield is a web accessibility consultant with Coolfields Consulting. He helps organizations to improve and understand the accessibility of their website. And as a developer, he works using WordPress to build effective, accessible websites for companies and charities. Graham actively contributes to the WordPress accessibility team and has spoken on accessibility at many WordPress WordCamps and meeting groups. So with that said, when you're ready, Graham, you can get
I'm
started.
ready. My presentation is in the
Go off,
process
Ivan.
of converting, so it will be I don't know, a
Let's
matter
take
of a
it.
few seconds, I think now. So I'll get started anyway. Thanks for the introduction, Hans. Um, my presentation, as I'll mention in a minute, is I'm sort of like in spirit of trying to open up accessibility to as wide an audience as possible. I've sort of pitched this presentation not at everyone who possibly is on the call who knows a lot about accessibility, but in common with the presentations I do at WordPress groups, I'm talking to people who build websites or who own websites and who might have heard of accessibility or maybe not, but who don't know how to get involved. And so that's where I'm pitching my presentation at. So I'm going to try and keep it as not, well, it won't be very technical. I mentioned a couple of things in places. It's really aimed at people who want to know a bit more about accessibility. Um, now, according to my screen, my presentation's available. Is that the case for everybody? Can people see my presentation now?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, good. Right. Okay. Well, I'll get started then. Um, Okay, so well, Hans introduced me. There's my contact details. So what I'm going to cover when I'm testing websites for accessibility, I do dip into the web accessibility guidelines published by the World Wide Web Consortium, known as WCAG or WCAG 2. It's a great resource for accessibility. It's not perfect. It's full of best practices, things you should do, things you shouldn't do. Um, but it can be quite hard to interpret in some places, especially if you're new to accessibility or not particularly technical. And let's find that. Right. Okay, so what I'm going to cover, so as I mentioned, in the spirit of trying to open up accessibility to as wide an audience as possible, I've pulled together a simple list of yes/no questions, sort of like a checklist that of things that anyone can do, even those without technical knowledge, to test aspects of the accessibility of their own website. It's aimed at, I mentioned, at developers and site administrators or anyone who wants to learn more about accessible. And the yes/no questions are fairly easy to check with simple techniques, but I am going to mention a couple of free tools that people can use to help answer the questions. I've tried to keep code and HTML out of it as much as possible. I'm going to be talking for about 30 minutes or so, and there'll be time at the end for questions. But in this time, obviously, it's not going to be possible to cover all potential accessibility issues. So I've chosen a selection of the most common and serious ones that you might come across. The sad fact is that there's a lot of inaccessible websites out there. But if you can answer these questions correctly about your website, it's going to be more accessible than many websites. So let's see how we get on. The first section I'm going to talk about is keyboard interaction, and this, as some of you will know, is unfortunately going to catch out a lot of websites. The first two questions I've got here, and you need to answer yes to both these. Can I easily access all parts of my website with the keyboard only? And can I easily see where keyboard focus is when I'm in my website? Keyboard interaction is very important for a lot of people. I'm thinking about people who can't use a mouse, or indeed those who choose not to use a mouse. Maybe they haven't used their arms or whatever like that. They may have conditions such as Parkinson's, which means they don't have the necessary precision for using a mouse with enough accuracy. It's also important for blind people as well. If they're accessing your website, they're going to be probably using a screen reader, And on desktop machines or laptops, they're likely to interacting with screen reader using a variety of keystrokes. As well as the specific keystrokes for their screen reader, they're also likely to be using the tab key, the enter key, the space bar, and the up and down arrow keys. So some examples of what can go wrong. This site is a screenshot from a site. It features a navigation bar at the top. It contains drop-down menus with links to various sub-pages of the site, and this is what happens when I'm using the mouse pointer to hover over the links on the navigation bar. You'll notice that there's quite an obvious color change of the links and the background. You'll also notice that drop-down menus appear and disappear as when I move over these links. But if you start to tab around the navigation, this is what you see. I was using Firefox when I took these screenshots. It's probably a bit small for people. There's a default focus indicator for Firefox is a thin dotted white line. But you can see it's a lot less easy to see where focus is than when you hovered over those links. And the other thing you'll notice is the drop-down menus haven't appeared as the main navigation links have got focus. On this particular website, there is no other way of getting to pages apart from the links on the main navigation bar. So if you can't use a mouse, it is almost impossible to visit more than half of the pages on this website. Next one. If you are technically minded, this can be quite easily fixed by adding the focus pseudo class to the whatever definitions you've got for your links. But don't ever do this. You find this on websites where someone has actually done this, and it effectively removes the browser default focus indicators. So anyone who is relying on keyboard interaction with your site, they're not really going to be able to tell where they are anywhere. If your website uses jQuery or other script libraries that can interact with navigation links to make them appear or disappear, the scripts also need to respond to keyboard focus as well as mouse hover as well. It is possible to create drop-down navigation menus that do respond to focus as well as mouse hover, and this is a website, an example of one that does. The drop-down menu appears when you hover over it. It also appears when you tab to those links at the top. Next question. Can I easily access all the functionality with the keyboard only? And once again, you need to answer yes to this one. Here's an example of a site where it doesn't work so well. This is a website that uses functionality that's known as a lightbox. If you click on the thumbnail images that are on this page, a panel with a larger version of the image opens up. I'll show you what that looks like. Yeah. They're very small on this screen, but there are controls at the bottom here to move on to the next or to the previous image and to close the lightbox. However, if I was tabbing around that original page and happened to activate the lightbox, the keyboard focus doesn't actually move into this lightbox panel. It's still sitting on the image on the main page beneath. This means it's going to be really difficult for people who rely on keyboard interaction to close this lightbox, since the link that closes it is actually a long way from where keyboard focus currently is. So the next question, does the keyboard tab order make sense? And once again, you need to answer yes. This doesn't seem to be quite as widespread problem as it used to be, but it's still worth checking. By and large, the tab order on a page should follow the logical flow of the content wherever possible. Some older WordPress sites that featured user comments used to have an issue whereby the focus jumped straight down into the comments at the bottom of the page before returning to the top of the page for content. Most sites that I've seen recently don't have that issue anymore. On to the next section, and this is about links, and there's a couple of questions in this area. Firstly, are your links obviously links? And you need to answer yes to this one. In the olden days of the web, say 10, 12 years ago, there was a convention that links were always marked with an underline. And people are still used to that convention. But occasionally you get something like this example. Sometimes site designers seem to think, well, you know what, I don't like links having an underline. I'll just make the text a different color. Now that's okay if you've got good eyesight. but having your links in mid-green with no underline alongside some mid-grey text, it's not so easy for those with poor eyesight or colour blindness. The next question, do all your links provide enough information to state where they lead to? And you need to be answering yes to that. Here's an example from a blog. And here we've got at the bottom some continue reading links. That's often text that you get, and other blogs might say read more. What we've got is an excerpt from the blog post here, and it's like a teaser inviting you to actually go to read the actual blog post itself. Of course, click here is another favorite piece of link text on some pages, preceded by a sentence or some other words. Now, sighted people might be able to work out what the continue reading links refer to, as they can take the context from the surrounding text. However, if you're using a screen reader, you may well be using functionality like this. Slides messed up there. Some functionality to list all the links on a page. And this is from NVDA, which is a popular and free to download screen reader. A screen reader may use the up and down arrow keys screen reader user may use the up and down arrow keys to move up and down through this list to find the links that interest them. Once they've found the one they're interested in, if they do, they can follow the link without actually having to be in the actual page itself. Now, the continue reading links do appear in this list, but there's no context there to describe what they actually refer to, which blog post they're referring to. It's kind of possible in this example to work it out if you move up and down and get a feel for it, but that's giving people a lot of work to do. So ideally, the destination of the link needs to be mentioned in the link text. Related to this is another question, question 7. Do any of your links open new windows or panels without letting the user know in advance? Ideally, you should avoid opening new windows or tabs altogether and let the user choose if they want to do that. But sometimes it's desirable or even unavoidable to open a new window or panel. And if that's the case, you need to let users know in advance. New windows or panels that appear unexpectedly can be disorientating for many people, including those who are blind, but also some people with cognitive impairments. There needs to be something connected with the link to let people know what's going to happen, and this warning needs to be visible as well as audible for those using screen readers. The lightbox example I showed earlier also falls foul of this question. On those images where it did open the lightbox, there was no warning there that the images that it was going to open up a new panel. Okay, so that's all I'm going to go and say about links. The next section is about media, adding images and videos to your site. The first question is, do all images have appropriate alternate text? It's quite an important one. And another question, I know there was a discussion about this just a few moments ago. It is still something that you find on a lot of sites. You need to answer yes to this, obviously. Up until recently, the main way to provide alternate text for images has been to use the alt attribute and the image tag in HTML. And this has been around right from the start of HTML, as far as I'm aware, and is what screen readers will read out when they find an image on the page. And so for each image, your alt attribute ought to describe what the image shows or what it represents. And if the image is a link to somewhere else, then that's what ought to be in the alternate text, destination. Now, I've also put a note there that appropriate may mean empty. And if an image is there just to create a mood or is purely decorative, potentially as this picture of blue sky on the right-hand side there might be, it would be okay to use the empty string for your alt attribute. Screen readers know to ignore images that have a blank alt attribute. It's not a good idea to leave out the alt attribute altogether. In those situations, screen readers typically will read out the path to the image and the file name, which may or may not be useful to the screen reader user. There are other ways of adding alternate text to images, but screen reader support is not consistently available for the newer methods that are coming along at the moment. But if you don't know, how do you know what the alt attributes are on your site? Well, it's quite possible to find out using a tool called the Wave Toolbar. I have this installed as an add-on in my Firefox browser, and it's a useful tool for highlighting all sorts of accessibility features and failures within a page. And I've just got a little screenshot of the toolbar itself at the top there. So there's a button there, errors, features and alerts. If you click on that, it will show you a series of icons on the page. Green icons represent where the Wave toolbar thinks that an accessibility feature has been done correctly. Yellow icons indicate potential problems. Red icons indicate where Wave is pretty certain that there are accessibility issues. And it's quite ironic that here's a useful accessibility tool that has such a visual interface along with the use of color to indicate severity. Now, I've used it on here and you can see that it's highlighted what I've set as the alternate text for these images. I hope that's not too small for people to see. And note that the third image is one where I've given that an empty alt attribute because it's just a mood piece, that one. On the bottom right here is one that I've set up where I've deliberately left out the alt attribute completely. And it's got that red icon next to it to indicate the problem there. Now, the Wave toolbar also indicates other accessibility aspects within web pages, and it also shows you heading structure and the use of lists like structural elements as well. And whilst this tool is useful, it would be a mistake to rely solely upon the presence of the green icons as a measure of accessibility of your website. Wave can tell you whether alternate text is present, but it won't know if the alternate text is appropriate or not. And as far as I'm aware, there are no automated accessibility testing tools that can fully take place of a manual check on a website. I'll be mentioning the Wave tool again a little bit later on. So on to the next question. Can you answer yes to this one? Do all videos have captions? There's a me giving a presentation similar to this one at a WordPress group. It's an obvious thing to say, but captions are very important for people who have hearing impairments. In the UK, there are something like 2 million people with hearing impairments who rely on or would benefit from captions provided for videos. Also, there are people with cognitive impairments, for example, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, etc., who can also benefit from watching the captions alongside the video. But captions are useful for many other people as well. I used to work in a corporate environment, and in those offices, all the desktop computers had the sound card removed. So if I was browsing the web at lunchtime and I was browsing on your website, I wanted to look at the videos about your products or services. If they didn't add captions, I wouldn't really be able to get anything out of them. Now, I'm not going to pretend that adding captions to your videos is something you can do in 30 seconds, but there are tools out there that can help you do it. It's especially easy if you've actually got a transcript of what's going on in your video, and then it can be quite a quick process. Right, so the next section is about signposting content. A couple of questions in this area. First one, are your page titles unique and meaningful? You need to answer yes to that one. This is for screen reader users really, and when a screen reader arrives at a new page, the first thing a screen reader will read out to a text, so its user, is the page title. It helps reassure people that they're in the right place, and you can see the page titles easily on desktop browsers. They're displayed in the browser tab area. For example, here. The next question, question 11. Do pages have appropriate headings and subheadings? Once again, you need to answer yes. Headings are a really useful way of flagging up sections of your content and are actually helpful for everyone, not just those with disabilities or impairments. Headings enabled site visitors to drill down quickly into bits of the page they may be interested in, especially on longer pages. Within screen readers, the headings on a page can be used as a form of in-page links. If we look at the elements list in NVDA, which we saw before when we were talking about links, it's now showing us the headings on a page, including the hierarchy of the headings. So it's a good idea to get that right so that it makes sense to people who are using this list. Once again, you can use the up and down arrow keys to move through this list. And when a screen reader user has found the heading that might interest them, they can use the button at the bottom of the page here to actually to move straight to that heading. There is similar functionality in JAWS, which is another popular screen reader. If you're not sure about the headings on your own website, you can use the Wave toolbar once again to show which levels are present. Sometimes on websites, text can look like a heading, but it actually isn't marked up as a heading, so it's good to check that too. And here's an indication of the headings from this particular page of my own website. It's Wave showing you the heading levels. The next section covers text on your pages. This one, question 12, can I resize the text on a page without breaking the layout? You need to answer yes to this one, ideally. People with poor eyesight and potentially those with cognitive impairments may need to increase the size of text within web pages. All browsers offer the capability to do this. By default, all browsers these days favor the zoom mode, which makes everything bigger, text, images, everything. But this doesn't suit everyone, as it can quickly lead to horizontal scroll bars appearing. It's easy for people to lose visual connection between elements if you ask them to do constant left-right screen movement. And this can make browsing hard work, and your site visitors may go elsewhere. Fortunately, all the major browsers also offer the capability of just resizing the text on a page, but not making anything else bigger too. Many people will be using that capability. In Firefox, you can do this by setting the Zoom Text Only option within the View Zoom menu item. But this can challenge certain websites. See what happens. This is from a banking website, and here's a list of links sitting on a grey background. But see what happens when I increase the text size on this site. See how the links have spilled out from its fixed size background and start to clash with the content beneath. Sometimes text, of course, may disappear as it moves over non-contrasting backgrounds. It becomes very difficult to use the site here. So web designs need to be resilient to this and allow boxes and backgrounds to stretch when the text inside them grows. Your website may start to look weird at larger text sizes, but as long as the text is readable, and that's the most important thing, isn't it? Okay, I can't see my share anymore. I can't see my slides anymore. Not sure what's happened there. Can anyone else see my slide?
I think somebody switched the one of the hosts switched the layout. You should be getting your slides back up. Sorry.
All right, yeah, it's back now. Thanks, Hans. Thanks for that. Okay, where were we? Right, question 13. Is any of the text fully justified? You need to answer no to this one. Okay, here's a big paragraph of text that's left aligned, and this is what it looks like when I fully justify it. Now, if I move backwards and forwards between those two, you may be able to see what's going on. When it's left aligned like this, the gaps between all the words are constant right throughout that paragraph. But if I fully justify the text, the browser has to alter the gaps between the words for each line in the paragraph to make the right margin hard as well. Whilst fully justified paragraph looks on the face of it to be a lot neater, it actually gives our brains a lot more work to do and can slow down reading speeds. And for some people, including many people suffering from dyslexia, this can be a real problem. Large gaps can open up between the words in the browser where they line up. And so people will start to see what's called the rivers of white space effect. And this can really seriously impact some people's ability to read and follow the text on pages. The next section's on user input concerning internet forms. One of the most important ways that people can, of course, interact with your website. The question here I'm going to cover here is, do all form fields have an accompanying label? And you need to answer yes to this one. Properly marked up labels are very important in forms as they tell screen reader users what input is required in each form field, along with potentially other information like the format required for dates, etc., and whether the form field is mandatory or not. I've put together this simple example page to demonstrate. It's got two columns, and in each column I've got two text boxes and some radio buttons. On the left-hand side, they're marked up properly with labels, and on the right-hand side, they aren't. So what happens if you're using a screen reader? If I land on one of the input fields on the left-hand side, the user receives a useful prompt as to what's required in that field. But on the right-hand side, when there are no labels, the screen reader will just say something like edit autocomplete blank, which is what NVDA would say. Or it depends on which screen reader you're using and which type of input field, obviously. So there's no real information there to tell the user what the input field's for. So how do you check whether your labels are correctly linked on your website, if you're assuming, of course, you didn't code it yourself? Well, we can use the Wave toolbar for that too. And I've run the Wave toolbar over this example page, and the Wave toolbar spotted that these input fields on the left-hand side have an accompanying label, and so it thinks that's good, hence the green icons. It doesn't know whether the label's actually right or not. But on the other side, it can't find any labels at all on the right-hand side, so it flags up the accessibility issue with red icons. There's extra icons in there as well around the radio buttons, because I've actually used a field set to group radio buttons, and that's a pretty good idea to ensure the accessibility of a group of radio buttons. And it's also can be useful for checkboxes as well. On the right hand side, I haven't included the field set, and that's why that yellow icon is appearing there. It's an alert to tell me that perhaps I ought to be using one. Okay, the last section I'm going to cover is on color and shape. First question, is the color contrast sufficient? You need to be answering yes to that one. Poor color contrast in web pages can make life difficult for a number of people, including those with poor vision, those with color blindness, and also some people with cognitive impairments. Here is an example page that I borrowed from a banking website. It shows how a company has allocated its offices around the world. And you almost don't need me to say it, but the light grey text on the white background has nowhere near enough color contrast. Also on the right-hand side, there's some blue text on a lighter blue background. But how do you know if the color contrast is sufficient on your own site? It's a good question. The WCAG 2 guidelines I mentioned earlier contain an algorithm that can be used to determine the level of color contrast between a background and a foreground. But it's a complicated sum to work out, even if you did know the color values that are involved. So you need an app for that. Here's a handy tool, the Color Contrast Analyzer. And this one I use is from the Paciello group website. It's free to download, and it's available for both Windows and Mac machines, I believe. And when you start it up, it looks like this, and it sits above all your open applications. The great thing about this tool is that you can use the color picker to choose foreground and background colors quickly. And as soon as you've chosen, the tool indicates straight away whether there is sufficient color contrast between the foreground and background colors to satisfy the WCAG 2 guidelines. I use this a lot when I'm doing accessibility testing. And the great thing also about this tool is that you don't actually need to be in a web page to use it. If you're in the process of getting a new website designed or building a website yourself, and you've got to design an image or a Photoshop file, you can test the color contrast before it's even on a web page. Okay, here's another color contrast issue. This one involves contrast between adjacent items. In this example form I've created, the color contrast between the dark text and light backgrounds is fine with both the labels for the input fields and the text within the input boxes themselves. Excuse me. But the problem here is that the contrast between the main background and the input field background is quite subtle. So subtle, in fact, that it might be hard to see where the input ends and the background begins. By default, form elements on a web page have a strong contrasting border to highlight where they begin and end. And you have to be very careful when removing that border to ensure that everyone can see where the input fields are. So we're at the final question that I'm going to cover in this presentation. Is meaning conveyed by color or shape only? You need to answer no to this one. Here's an example I've put together based on my experience from being in the IT department of a large corporate. In common with many companies, they used RAG status reports to indicate the progress within various projects that were currently active. RAG in this case stands for red, amber and green, And the red color was used to highlight projects with significant issues, amber for projects with some issues or where issues were being addressed, and green, which was used for projects that were running according to plan. And this is kind of what they look like. The problem here, of course, is that color is being used as the way of conveying the meaning here. Those who are blind, colorblind, or may have poor vision may struggle to understand the actual project status. It's perfectly acceptable to use color to convey meaning, but just to make sure that other ways are provided as well. And the simple addition of text into these status boxes will lead to a solution that everyone can understand. It's not the only way of doing it, obviously. The final column in this table is from another report that I used to see occasionally, and it featured ticks and crosses. Ticks and crosses are okay as long as everyone knows what they mean, and as long as they are accessible to whatever methods someone is using to access the page. If they're just marked up as symbols or icons or whatever, there's no guarantee that screen readers will actually read them out. If you're going to use ticks and crosses, maybe the best approach would be to use an image with some alternate text to go with it, or just use the words yes and no instead. It might make things a lot easier. Anyway, that's all the questions out of the way. For anyone who's interested, I've included here a couple of useful links. That's where you get the color contrast analyzer that I was showing you earlier, and also the Wave toolbar. It's an add-on for Firefox browser. And there we go. And thanks for listening. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions. I guess throw it open to the panel. I'm looking at the chat. I guess that's the place to go to look at the questions. Thanks, Mike. Center aligned text. Thank you. Yes, good question. Well, sometimes I do use it. It doesn't give quite such an issue, I don't believe, as fully justified text. But sometimes it makes the thing harder to read. I'm just going to pop back to the previous page with the link for color contrast analyzer. I'm going to put these slides on SlideShare, and I'll circulate the link to that very soon. Questions are disappearing. Forgive me if you just typed a question. It's just there's loads of them disappearing off my box. Would something like continue reading post title be enough? I think Aurelio, that would be the right thing to do. Sometimes people use techniques to do that, but hide the text from screen reader users. That's an approach I've used in some certain blogs. But yes, as long as you say continue reading the post title, I think that would be quite enough. Okay, Claire, in WordPress widget headings are often marked up as H3. Is this bad in the context of the heading hierarchy? That depends. It depends what other headings are going on a page. Even though HTML will allow you to use kind of headings without the hierarchy, it actually is quite confusing for people. It depends on the context of the page. What I do, Claire, when I build my WordPress websites is I will have an H2 heading typically at the top of the widget block that says something like secondary navigation or something like that, but then move it off the page because I usually use at the top level heading for the page title, and then a second level headings and third level headings and what have you for in the actual content. And then you've got a heading that says secondary navigation and then your widget title. So H3 might be appropriate there, but it depends on the situation. Rob asked a question, what's the best way to show a field is required? There's a number of different ways. I like to actually show it in the field label visibly so that everyone knows. You can use the required text or mandatory text. Some people add an asterisk symbol to the label as long as you've got something at the top that says fields marked with an asterisk, which screen readers often read out as star. That's a way. There are the HTML5 required attribute is useful to use as well, and there is an ARIA attribute called ARIA required. if you use all of those together, I think you're probably going to cover all the bases there. Robin Osborne, are these the slides from your session? Yes, I gave a presentation very similar to this to a number of WordPress groups. I have tweaked this one slightly, but that's a good base. And like I said, I'll be sharing the slides from this particular version of this presentation in the very near future. There's very little, Robin, there's very little difference between the presentations. I've used some WordPress examples in here, and you know, it wasn't overtly specifically referencing WordPress, but there were a couple of places. Oh, M Struts, we found the best way is to explicitly say optional for optional fields. Yes, you can do that too. Could you please tell me more about mobile devices, maybe some voiceover Siri tips? Certainly, I test websites on an iPad with using VoiceOver, and obviously it's very different to using a screen reader on a desktop or a laptop. As you know, I've found pretty much, and I'm prepared to be corrected on this, but as long as your website is, you know, is good on a desktop or a laptop, generally I found that VoiceOver copes very well with it as well. When you engage VoiceOver, and I do demonstrate to people sometimes after my presentations how VoiceOver works briefly, it obviously changes quite radically the way that your touch device works. But I found that as long as you have everything marked up successfully, then VoiceOver copes pretty well with it. I've tried TalkBack for Android as well. It's pretty good, but not as good as VoiceOver is my view. Rob G, are there screen reader tools for touch devices? Well, I think I just mentioned them. There's VoiceOver for iPads and iPods, and you know, iPhones, and TalkBack on Android. Testing. Right, Henny's question: if testing on iOS, blah blah blah. Okay, that's an interesting one, Henny. Thank you for that. Robin Christopherson also used an app, I believe, that actually turned the screen off as well. Yeah, Henny, you're answering Rob's questions there. Curtain. Right, I think that was the one that Robin Christopherson used.
All right, are there any other questions?
On my presentation, I've also included a list at the end of things that I didn't cover. I put this in for completeness when I do the presentation for other people. And when I put it up onto SlideShare, what I might do is actually pull all the questions into one page right at the end, so people have a cutout and keep memento if they want to. They can pin to their machine. Rob, can you change the native HTML error messages if changing the title tag will be read out by a screen reader? Not quite sure I understand what you mean by that question, Rob. Do you mean like changing the title tag in jQuery or after this page is loaded? I'm not certain on that one. I'm not sure whether screen readers would respond to the title changing after the page is loaded. I can't comment on that one. I'll have to try that out. The question about ADF, Application Development Framework, said that the application. I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I'm not equipped to answer that question for you. Maybe someone else has a view on that one. Okay, are there any more questions? Doesn't look as though there are at the moment. Oh, here we go. And Monica's talking about the ADF apps. Aurelio has asked, do you have online alternatives to the tools you suggested? Well, I mentioned the Wave toolbar. Um, there is a version of Wave where you can submit your website into that, and it does a check. I haven't found that to be as good because the benefit of using the Wave toolbar as a Firefox add-on is that it's responding and testing to pages after any JavaScript has run on your page at page load. Also, the useful thing about the Wave toolbar running it as a Firefox add-on is that you can use it when you're actually developing websites as well before it's even gone live. With regards to color contrast analyzer, similarly with the Wave toolbar, that's one you can use on anything. There is a Firefox add-on for that as well that tells you about color contrast, and it gets most stuff. But where it doesn't always work, where you've got colored backgrounds that might be provided on websites with an image, or whether you've got text running across an image, I don't think that the Firefox add-on for color contrast will actually get that. And I see there's some other, there's another note for one. Arthur has commented on contrastfinder.tanaguru.com. I'll try that one out. Thank you, Arthur.
There was a question from Maya earlier about using all caps, if that should ever be allowed, and how to determine the limit of use.
Sorry, say that again, please.
For elements, locations on the page that should never use it, such as the main navigation. Her question is up a bit in the chat if you want to read it.
Oh, right, okay. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, right, all caps. Block capitals. Well, I'd say that was more of a usability, readability. If you're going to use all caps, then I think everyone knows that block capitals is it's going to tire people out, and it just gives you a lot of work to do, really. I know that there are some sites where there seems to be some legal requirement to use everything in block capitals, to sort of shout at people or something like that. But I don't know. My advice would be to never use everything in caps, really, unless it's just one word or two words. But that's just my view. Main navigation, I did actually build a site for someone a while ago where they in the main navigation they did insist on having blocks, but it was like block capitals, but it was just one or maybe two words in each link, so I did do it. I felt that that was probably okay. Any more than that, I think you're going to run into problems, really. I hope that answers your question, Maya. Right, so note, Steve's put a note, right, Graham, the advantage of CCA apps is that they can check contrasted images. Thanks for that, Steve. Jitendra, does ARIA allow people to use any tag and just add ARIA attributes? Well, I wouldn't have. Well, to a certain extent, I suppose that can be true, but it's not a good idea to do that because there's always a risk that you're going to have to do so much with ARIA to actually mask the native functionality of the tag that you are using, and to try and get it to behave like the tag that you want it to be. There's a saying, isn't there? If it if it looks like a squirrel and climbs trees, it's possibly a squirrel. And so I wouldn't have said that that's a good idea to do at all, really. I mean, it is possible. Sometimes on websites, people do have make like a div or a container on the page clickable or touchable. If you've got a section and like maybe a blog list, then it gives people a bigger target to click on. But I don't think I'd rely on that to happen. I use that in sometimes instead, as well as using the links within the actual text as well. I hope that answered your question. Galippo asked, what about ARIA and XHTML 1.0? Are you talking about validation there? Because if you're using XHTML, then yes, using ARIA tags will cause the page to fail validation. But my view would be that it's better to fail validation and to use ARIA where it's appropriate than not. Are there any other questions that I haven't that I've missed over when I've been running up and down this little chat box?
Had all the questions that there were.
That's it. Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I hope some of you found it useful. I know some of you it's like a busman's holiday. You will know all this stuff anyway in a lot more detail. But hopefully there's people out there that found it useful.
Thank you very much, Graham. It was very informative.
Cheers.